Welcome back to our two-part conversation with Dr. Mahzarin Banaji. Dr. Banaji is an award-winning experimental psychologist and professor at the Department of Psychology at Harvard. Her research explores the human mind, why and how we think and feel, especially in social contexts. She's helped create world-renowned frameworks to better identify and address implicit human bias, and is the co-creator of the Implicit association test, which has been used over 40 million times around the world. And she's also the author of a must-read book titled Blind Spot: The Hidden Biases of Good People. Welcome back, Dr. Banaji. Now let's talk about, once you understand that implicit bias is a very real thing, and you understand that in a way that, I think the next step would be, well, what can I do about it? How can I, correct for it? What steps can I take? So maybe the first question is, now that this has been established, what next?
Great question. All of us should be asking it. And in fact, we are. I think you're right to point out the moment. The questions that come to me today are much more about the pragmatics. So one small word of caution, using the words of Albert Einstein, who said, if you're asked to solve the most important problem in the world within a single hour, what you should do is spend 55 minutes simply representing the problem correctly and 5 minutes to solve it. So I do want to stress that as much as we want to get to the question of what are we going to do now, if we don't have the problem set up correctly, we will go down many blind alleys, and we have already. So I just want to stress that it's important for us to know where this is coming from, in what ways it's manifesting, representing it correctly, and we're not there yet. So when I speak to people, many of them still are absolutely perplexed that they may be the way that our data are showing that they are. So it requires a fair amount of work. It's like peeling, something that has lots and lots of skin that you have to open up to get to the center of it. So what I would say is that one of the ways in which change seems to be successful is when it is not just the individual I who am trying to change, but many little individuals and then institutions as a whole, and then something bigger. So let's just think in terms of change having 3 different levers that can be moved. I, as the individual, have to change. You have to change. Each of us has to change because it's in our own interest. And that's a very important part of this argument. This material should never be forced on people, right? We should say, come to this if you're interested in bettering yourself. If you actually want to be the kind of professor at the school I'm at that my school expects me to be, okay? So individuals have to change, but then institutions have to kick in, whether it's Procter & Gamble or Harvard or the New York Times or whatever the institution might be. The institution, independently of the individuals, has to create procedures and practices that will help individuals mitigate bias by just preventing it from even happening, let alone waiting for it to happen and then fixing it. And then, of course, there's the power of a country or a government, the law that comes in and says, from this day on, love is love, and anybody, same-sex couples can marry. I'll use sexuality as my example because on that dimension, on anti-gay bias, our culture has shifted very fast towards neutrality. We're giving up our anti-gay bias extremely fast. In 15 years, the evidence from my student Tessa Charlesworth shows that we have lost our anti-gay bias by 64%. It's dropped off, not just in what I say when I'm asked, because there I know what to say, but even when we look at the thumbprint of the culture on our brain, using the implicit association test, we're seeing a real drop-off. And when I'm asked why, I give this example that grandparents had to deal with their grandchildren coming out and saying, I'm gay. So that changed individuals. But then it wasn't just left to individuals to change. Institutions got involved. Institutions said, if you're a same-sex couple, we know that you currently don't have the rights for blah, blah, and blah, but we will treat you as if you're a couple. We will give you health benefits in the same way as if you were a married couple. And then, and Hollywood, of course, Hollywood did something quite remarkable. They put in front of us every day in TV shows and movies and ads and everything, interesting, cool gay people, cooler, smarter, nicer than straight people. So that ended up having some kind of effect because an industry decided to push that. And then finally, dragging its feet, the Supreme Court eventually came along. So in our lifetime, in the last 15 years, we've seen individuals change, institutions change, and the government and our society move a lever. When that happens together, I think that we're going to see evidence of the kind that we're just seeing, 64% drop in a 15-year period. So that's very important. But now we can take each of these and say, what do we need to do? How do you get individuals to change? Because remember, a child is never going to go to its grandparent and say, Grandma, I have to tell you something, I'm Black. That's not going to happen.
Right.
Are we as a society willing to say that because that's not going to happen, we're willing to put off change for a few hundred years? So now we have to ask ourselves questions like, what do I do if it's not going to happen through personal experience? How do I get my brain to understand that when people everywhere lead healthier and happier lives, it's actually going to have an impact on me. It's going to have an impact on my neighborhood and so on. So we can devise methods. So for example, symphony orchestras did something very interesting. To keep themselves from being biased, they dropped a curtain between the selectors and the musicians. And as that evidence showed, the number of women entered symphony orchestras quite fast after the curtain was dropped. So what does that mean? It means that these wonderful selectors who had been saying, we have no bias, we don't even look at the players, we close our eyes and we just listen to the music. But clearly something was going on. And what was going on is that the best musicians were not being selected. So they intervened. They denied themselves irrelevant data.
It's fascinating when you mentioned in your sexuality example, you mentioned, and it reminded me, and I'm sure the audience, that the role of business is significant here in establishing new norms that, start to change the cultural thumbprint, as you put it. Do you imagine that is, happening right now in terms of race?
Well, I have to be cautious, but having watched this field and having been involved in working with organizations since about 2004, first of all, I was very intrigued that for-profit businesses came to me first to say, if what you're showing is true, we need to know about it. It did not seem to be because they wanted to check off a box. They were seeking genuinely to understand what was going on. But until this moment, I did not see action, okay? Which I am beginning to see now. There is a louder voice with which businesses are speaking. And in fact, they're doing things that are quite non-traditional for businesses. We've heard many times that businesses should keep their eye on making money and doing what they have to do, and leave these issues to other people, to politicians, to judges, to members of society. But we're not seeing that in this moment. We're seeing that business is saying, this affects our business. It's kind of like climate change. Should my university get involved in the issue of climate change? We're a university. We're not supposed to be politicized in that way. In fact, we explicitly say that we will not be. But if climate change is going to affect whether the buildings in the university will stand, then it becomes an issue for us. And I think big business and every kind of business has discovered that this is actually relevant to them, that whatever the political issues might be, if they can't hire the best people, nurture them, plan for their future and so on, that their products will not be the best products, that their services will not be the best services. So I see them coming to it in this moment, yes, in a new way. What will actually happen from it? That's for history to tell us. But I do see a real shift right now.
Dr. Banaji, thank you very much for joining us for this Signal conversation.
Thank you very much for having me.